The day my son-in-law stood in my hospital room and told my daughter the baby she had just delivered wasn't his, I watched something in her eyes go out like a candle in a storm. She had been in labor for 19 hours. She hadn't slept. She was still bleeding. And he stood there in his pressed shirt. He'd come straight from the office, didn't even loosen his tie, and he said it like he was correcting an invoice. The timing doesn't work. I want a paternity test. My daughter looked at me, not at him, at me. And I knew then that whatever came next was going to be the hardest thing either of us had ever survived. My name is Loretta. I'm 64 years old, and I've buried a husband, raised 2 children alone, worked 31 years as a school librarian in Savannah, Georgia, and I have never in my life been the kind of woman who makes a scene. My mother raised me to keep my voice low and my spine straight. I believed in handling things quietly, privately, with dignity, but some things cannot be handled quietly. My daughter's name is Becca. She was 29 when this happened. She taught 2nd grade at an elementary school in Loretta, just outside Atlanta. She had her father's laugh and my stubbornness and a way of loving people so completely that she never quite learned to protect herself from them. She met her husband at a colleague's backyard barbecue the summer she turned 26. His family owned a chain of commercial real estate firms across the Southeast. Office buildings, shopping centers, industrial parks. Old Georgia money with new Georgia manners. His mother wore pearls to casual dinners. His father played golf with city council members. They were the kind of family that sponsored the hospital wing but never visited patients. He pursued Becca the way men like him pursue things they want, with confidence and persistence and the quiet assumption that the answer would eventually be yes. She told me about him after their 3rd date. He's different from the guys I usually meet, Mum. He actually listens. I remember standing at my kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard where she used to play, and thinking, baby girl, men like that are very good at listening until they get what they want. But I kept that thought to myself. She was an adult. It wasn't my place. They married 18 months later. The wedding was beautiful. Becca made sure of that, did most of the planning herself because her mother-in-law had very specific ideas and Becca was too kind to fight every battle. The reception was at a venue outside Savannah, and I danced with my daughter until my feet ached, and I told myself I was being a protective old mother and that everything would be fine. It wasn't fine. The 1st year was good enough, but somewhere in the 2nd year, I started noticing things when I visited. The way he'd correct her in front of people, small things, her pronunciation of a restaurant name, the way she'd organize the pantry, the way she'd apologize immediately without him even asking. The way she'd look at me sideways when he said something, like she was checking to see if I'd noticed. I always noticed. I never said anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. Then she got pregnant, and for a while things seemed better. He seemed genuinely happy about it. He talked about the baby girl constantly at family dinners. He set up the nursery himself, painted it twice because the first shade was wrong. I started to think maybe I'd been projecting my own fears onto their marriage. I was wrong to think that. It was a 4th of July weekend. His parents had a lake house in North Georgia up near Blue Ridge, and the whole family gathered there. His brother and sister-in-law, his parents, some cousins, family friends from the business world. Becca was 4 months pregnant. She was tired and a little nauseated, and she told me later she almost didn't go, but he wanted her there and she didn't want to cause a problem. The first evening there, his father kept refilling her glass. Sweet tea, he said, a special blend his housekeeper made with mint and peach. Becca loved it. She had 3 glasses over the course of the evening. She told me later the taste was slightly off, like something underneath the sweetness that she couldn't identify, but she'd assumed it was the peach syrup. By 9 o'clock she was exhausted in a way that felt wrong, heavier than normal fatigue. She went to bed early. She woke up the next morning feeling confused and sore in a way she couldn't explain. Her husband was already down at the lake with his brother. The house was full of people. She told herself she'd overdone it, that pregnancy made everything harder. She didn't tell anyone. She barely let herself think about it. She called me that afternoon just to talk. I remember she said, "I don't feel right, Mom." I asked her what she meant. She said she didn't know, just that something felt off. I asked if the baby was moving. She said yes. I told her to rest, drink water, call her OB if it got worse. I didn't push further. I have thought about that phone call every day since. The pregnancy continued. She came home from Blue Ridge and things went back to whatever normal was for them. But her husband grew colder as the months passed. He started picking fights about money. She was spending too much on the nursery. She should have checked with him before buying the crib. He started coming home late. He stopped asking about her doctor appointments. By the time she was 8 months along, she was calling me every few days, not to complain exactly, but just to hear a voice that wasn't his. Her water broke on a Tuesday morning in February. He was in a meeting and didn't answer his phone. She called me, and I drove the 45 minutes from Savannah to Northside Hospital in Atlanta in under an hour, which is either a miracle or evidence that I was doing 90 on I-16. I was there for all 19 hours. I held her hand. I talked her through it. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, 7 pounds even, the most beautiful creature I had ever seen since Becca herself was born, I cried so hard the nurse brought me a cup of water and asked if I needed to sit down. He arrived 2 hours after the birth. He'd finished his meeting. He'd stopped to change his shirt. He stood in the doorway of that room and looked at the baby, and something passed across his face that I didn't understand at first. Not joy. Not wonder. Something calculating. He came in, kissed Becca on the forehead. Formal, quick, and then he stood at the bassinet for a long time without touching the baby, just staring. She came early, he said finally. Babies do, I said. He looked at me then with an expression I'd never seen on him before, not unfriendly, just resolved, like he'd made a decision. I need to talk to you alone, he said to Becca. I said I would step out, but Becca grabbed my hand. Mom stays. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Fine. He pulled out his phone and showed her something on the screen. I've been keeping track of dates, he said. The due date the hospital has doesn't match what I calculated. This baby should not have been born for another 3 weeks. Becca stared at him. She's premature, the doctor already explained. I want a paternity test. The room went very quiet. Even the baby seemed to go still. I stood up from my chair. I am not a tall woman. I am 5'3" and I was wearing the cardigan I'd grabbed from the back of my car because hospital rooms are always cold. But I stood up and I looked at that man and I said very quietly, she just gave birth to your daughter 19 hours ago. She hasn't slept. Get out of this room. He looked at me the way people look at something mildly inconvenient. This isn't about you, Loretta. You're right, I said. It's about your wife and your daughter, and the fact that you are standing in this room right now making accusations instead of holding that baby. So yes, we'll do your test. And while we wait for the results, I suggest you think very carefully about what kind of man you want to be. He left. The nurse came in 10 minutes later and was very gentle and professional about the process for requesting a voluntary paternity test through the hospital. Becca didn't say anything for a long time. She just held the baby and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline in the grey February afternoon. Mom, she said finally. I know, baby. Something happened at the lake house. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I think something happened to me and I don't remember it. I sat down on the edge of her bed. I took her free hand in both of mine. Tell me, I said. She told me everything, the sweet tea, the taste she couldn't place, waking up confused and sore. The way she'd told herself she was imagining it because the alternative was something she couldn't face in a house full of his family. I did not cry. I needed to be steady for her. But something shifted in me that afternoon, something that had been simmering for 3 years, and I made a decision. I was not going to let this go. The paternity test results came back 9 days later. I was at Becca's apartment. She had gone back to the house she shared with him exactly once to get the baby's things, and then she'd come to stay with a friend who had a spare room. The results showed that he was not the father, but the genetic data also included something the lab flagged for the ordering physician, a partial familial match to the paternal line. Not him, but someone genetically close to him. The doctor called Becca directly. I was sitting next to her when she got that call. I watched her face. She already knew. Somewhere in the part of herself she'd been trying to quiet for months, she had already known his father. I will not tell you his name because I refuse to give it more space than it deserves. He was 63 years old, well regarded in Atlanta business circles, a deacon at his church, a man who gave speeches about community and legacy and the importance of strong families. He had a wife who wore pearls to dinner. He had 2 sons. He had, we would later learn, a pattern. Becca filed a police report that same week. I drove her to the precinct myself and sat with her for 3 hours while she gave her statement to a detective. The detective was a woman in her 40s, calm and thorough, who asked questions without flinching and took everything down. She told Becca that these cases were difficult. She told her the truth, which I respected. Difficult was not the same as impossible. The next step was finding a lawyer. A friend from my church, a woman whose daughter had gone through something similar 10 years before, gave me a name. a civil rights and victims advocacy attorney named Cecile, who had an office in Midtown Atlanta and a reputation for taking on powerful people. When I called her office and explained the situation, her paralegal asked me to come in the following Thursday. Cecile was 58, small and precise, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the kind of calm that comes from having seen the worst of people and deciding to fight it anyway. She listened to everything. She did not express surprise. She said what she needed. The DNA results, Becca's medical records from the weekend at the lake house, if any existed, and any documentation of other women. We didn't have other women, not yet. The medical records from that weekend were minimal. Becca hadn't seen a doctor after coming home from Blue Ridge because she hadn't known to. But Cecile found something else. She filed subpoenas for financial records from the family's business entities and discovered a pattern of payments. LLCs cutting checks to women who had signed documents with broad confidentiality provisions. The documents were vague in their language, referring to disputes and misunderstandings and mutual agreements to part ways. Cecile had seen language like that before. She knew what it meant. It took us 4 months to find the first woman. She had worked as a property manager for one of the buildings in Buckhead. She'd left the job suddenly 6 years earlier and moved back to her hometown in Tennessee. When Cecile's investigator located her and explained why they were reaching out, she cried for 10 minutes on the phone before she could speak. Her story was almost identical to Becca's: a company event at a rented venue, a drink that tasted slightly wrong, waking up the next morning not understanding her own body. Being offered a settlement she felt she couldn't refuse because she was 24 years old and had no savings, and his family's attorneys were terrifying. She had never told anyone except her sister. There were others, she told us. I know there were. He wasn't careful because he'd never had to be. With her testimony, Cecile felt we had enough to bring the criminal case to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office alongside the civil suit. The DA's office assigned it to a prosecutor who was thorough and careful, and who told us plainly that the family would fight hard and that we needed to be prepared for a difficult process. They were right that the family would fight. His attorneys released a statement suggesting Becca had fabricated the timeline. His wife gave an interview to a local business publication, framed as a profile of her charity work, in which she made comments about women who seek proximity to successful families for personal gain. My daughter read that interview at my kitchen table and did not cry. She folded the paper in half and said, "Okay, what's next?" That's when I knew she was going to be all right. What happened next was this. Her husband called her. He had been quiet since the results came back. His attorneys had advised him, I assume, to say nothing. But he called her on a Sunday evening, 3 months into the legal process, and she answered because something told her to. He said he had confronted his father. He said his father hadn't denied it. He said, and his voice broke here, she told me, in a way she'd never heard from him before, that his father had told him she was a nobody who didn't matter, and that he'd done it as a favor because he thought she wasn't good enough for his son and he wanted to give his son a reason to end the marriage. Becca was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you believe him? That was his reason?" Her husband said he didn't know. He said he wasn't sure it mattered what the reason was. She said, "It matters to me, because if you believe it, even a little bit, then we have nothing to talk about." He was quiet. Then he said, "What can I do?" He provided Cecile's team with 5 years of internal communications he had access to through the family business. Emails, schedules, records of the family's lake house being used for company retreats where the same women's names appeared and then disappeared from payroll. He didn't have everything, but what he had was enough to corroborate the pattern. He also found something neither of us expected: a recorded voicemail that his father had accidentally saved to a shared cloud backup. A message his father had left for his own brother the summer after the lake house weekend. In the message, he referenced Becca by description, not name. He said she had no people. He said the peach tea worked like it always did. He said she would never remember, and even if she did, nobody would listen to her. When Cecile played that recording for the prosecutor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We're moving forward." The first woman from Tennessee came forward publicly in October. By November, 2 more women had contacted Cecile's office. Both had signed NDAs years earlier. Cecile challenged the enforceability of those agreements on the grounds that they had been obtained through fraud and intimidation. One held, one didn't. Either way, both women gave depositions. 4 women total, 4 women spanning 11 years. The trial was in the spring. I sat in that courtroom every single day. Becca testified for a day and a half. She was precise and steady, And she looked at the jury when she spoke, not at him. She told them about the lake house. She told them what she woke up to. She told them about calling me that afternoon and saying, "I don't feel right, Mom," and not being able to name why. When she was done, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. He sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He looked smaller than I remembered. The golf tan was gone. His hands, folded on the table, were very still. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I didn't sleep much during those 2 days. I sat in my house in Savannah and held my granddaughter while Becca tried to rest. And I talked to that baby the way I used to talk to Becca when she was small. Just quietly, just telling her about the world, the parts worth knowing about. Guilty. Aggravated sexual battery. Drugging with intent to commit assault. 2 counts of obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced him to 35 years. He will die in prison. His wife divorced him before sentencing and released a statement about being devastated by the revelation of his actions. His business partners dissolved the partnership within 60 days. The church quietly removed his name from the donor wall. Becca and her husband did not reconcile as a couple. There was too much between them. His accusations in that hospital room, the months she'd spent not knowing if he'd believed her, the fundamental question of whether she could trust someone whose instinct in a moment of crisis had been to doubt her rather than stand beside her. They ended the marriage. He pays child support without dispute, shows up for every visitation, coaches the t-ball team at the park near his apartment. He loves his daughter. That part is real. Becca doesn't take that away from him, and I respect her for it. The civil settlement funded 3 things: a college account for my granddaughter, a down payment on a small house in Decatur where Becca and the baby now live, and a donation to a victim advocacy nonprofit in Atlanta that provides legal representation and emergency housing to women who can't afford either. My granddaughter is 3 now. She has Becca's laugh, and I think her father's hands, long fingers that she uses to take apart every toy she touches to see how it works. She calls me Grandma Low, and she falls asleep in my arms every time I visit, which is as often as I can manage, which is often. I think about that phone call sometimes. Becca saying, "I don't feel right, Mom," and me telling her to drink water and rest. I have turned that moment over in my hands more times than I can count, looking for what I should have done differently. I don't know that there was something. I don't know that pushing harder on a 4-month phone call would have changed what happened in that house. But I know that the moment she told me the truth in that hospital room, I did not flinch, and I did not doubt her, and I did not let go of her hand. That's what I can give myself. That much I can keep. People ask me sometimes if I hate him, his father, the man who sat in that courtroom with his still hands and his expensive suit and looked at my daughter like she was an inconvenience he was waiting to outlast. I don't hate him. Hatred takes energy I'd rather spend on my granddaughter, but I am glad he is where he is. And I am glad it was us who put him there. Becca went back to teaching last fall. 2nd grade again, different school, closer to Decatur. She told me on the first day back she'd forgotten how much she loved it. The noise of it, the absolute sincerity of 7-year-olds, the way they say what they mean without calculation. I think that's what she needed to come back to, something true. I'm 64 years old and I have outlasted things I didn't think I could survive. A husband who died too young, years of doing it all alone, and now this. I used to think strength was something you were born with, or you weren't. I know now it's something you practice, like scales on a piano. You do it when it's hard, and you do it when you're scared, and eventually it's there when you need it most. My daughter needed me to be strong in that hospital room on a February afternoon with the Atlanta skyline grey through the window and a brand new baby in her arms and a man who should have loved her telling her she wasn't to be believed. I was strong. We both were. We still are. That's the thing they never account for, men like him. They look at a woman who has no money, no connections, no allies in the room, and they think that means she has nothing. They forget about the women who raised her. They forget about every hard thing she's already survived. They forget that the person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. We had everything to lose. We lost some of it, and we rebuilt it better, and we're still here. If you're listening from somewhere out there, sitting in your car in a parking lot because that's the only quiet place you have, or in a hospital room, or in a shelter with a plastic bag of your belongings and a baby who doesn't understand what's happening, I want you to know something. There are people who will help you. There are women like Cecile who got into this work because someone helped them once or because no one helped them and they decided that was going to change. You are allowed to ask. You are allowed to be believed. You are allowed to take up space. Say what happened to you. Say it clearly and don't stop saying it until someone listens.